Okay, great. I'm going to get us started. So thank you all so much for joining us today on this month's collaborative mentoring webinar series. I'm Minnie Chen from Mentor National. I'll be kicking us off. Before we get started, just want to share some housekeeping information. All attendees have been muted for the best sound quality. However, we definitely want you to participate and engage with us and our speaker today. So feel free to type any comments in the chat box, as all you have been doing, introducing yourselves, type any questions that you might have for our speaker today in the Q&A panel. And then feel free, if you need live captions for this webinar, they are available by pressing the CC button at the bottom of the screen. So we have two poll questions today, just to get a sense of who's in the audience. So our first one is, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? So beginner, experienced, expert, and I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that. Okay, share the results. So it looks like we have 26% of you all are beginners, 62 are experienced, and 12% experts. Thanks so much. And then our second poll is, what is your role in the mentoring field, or what best describes your role in the mentoring field? Are you mostly a mentoring program staff practitioner? Are you a mentor? Are you an educator, technical assistance provider, researcher, funder, or other? And obviously, I know many of you probably are multiple of these roles, so feel free to just type in or choose which one best describes you. And if you're other, feel free to also kind of type in the chat what your role is and how you're connected to the mentoring field. I'm going to end the poll and then share it. So 64% of you are mentoring program staff and practitioners. We have 7% mentors, 2% educators, 7% technical assistance providers. We have some researchers, 3%, and 2% funders, and 16% others. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope that the information shared on today's webinar is applicable to all of you all in the work that you do. Again, 1 week after the webinar today, you'll also receive instructions for how to access the webinar recording, since we are recording it. You can also just access this information directly at our collaborative mentoring webinar series webpage, where all of the recordings and the resources are posted, along with, you can see an archive of all of our past webinars. So definitely check that out. And as a reminder, please help us out by answering the survey questions at the end of today's webinar. We use that to inform our future webinars. Now I'm very excited to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Really excited for what he has to share today. Donovan Livingston is an award-winning educator, spoken word poet, and public speaker. In 2016, his Harvard Graduate School of Education convocation address, Lift Off, went viral, reaching over 13 million views and prompting Hillary Clinton to praise. It's young graduates like Livingston who made it clear that America's best days are still ahead. Since his pivotal speech, Livingston has been featured on CNN, NPR, BBC, and Good Morning America, and other news outlets. Believer in the enormous opportunities that education provides, Livingston inspires students, educators, and communities with his conviction that every child has the right to lift off and achieve their dreams. Drawing on personal experiences as well as scholarship, Livingston examines the role of culture, hip hop, and spoken word poetry and student experiences in higher and post-secondary education. In addition, Livingston's expertise includes educational leadership, anti-racist pedagogy, and qualitative research methodologies. He incorporates creative elements into his lectures, such as spoken word poetry and audience collaboration, which we will have some of that today. Livingston has earned master's degrees from Columbia and Harvard University, PhD from University of North Carolina at Greensboro in Educational Leadership and Cultural Foundations. And currently he serves as the Assistant Dean of the Office of University Collaborations and lecturer in the Department of Education at Wake Forest University. He currently lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with his wife Lauren and daughter Jo and 2 beagles. So I'm really honored to introduce Donovan today for a speaker, and also want to give a shout out to Mentor North Carolina for helping make this connection to Donovan and helping form today's webinar. So I'm going to pass it off to Donovan.
Yo, thank you so much, Minnie, for that warm introduction. What's good, family? It's I'm so excited to be able to break bread with you this afternoon. I represent a village of family and friends, my wife, Lauren, my daughter, Joy. Like, everybody who has poured into me is responsible for me being able to break bread with you and share with you in this space. I don't exist as a scholar, an MC, or an educator if it's not for the people that have poured into me, right? So for me, mentoring isn't just a field to like learn and practice, but it is an opportunity to live out an extension of who I am as a person and to bring life to the communities that have raised me. So with peace and love, I greet you on this wonderful fall afternoon. I'm really excited to, again, share space with you today to talk a little bit about hip hop and the role it can serve in our work as mentors and as mentors who are interested in improving the way we collect data and capture student stories. So today my talk is entitled, I'm gonna put the little homies on next, Mentoring, Mixtapes, and Hip Hop Informed Approaches to Collecting Data. So if you have questions, please, keep them, hold them close and drop them in the chat. Looking forward to continuing this conversation, but that's where we'll kick things off today. So let's get into it, shall we? So real quick, as Minnie mentions, I'm a spoken word poet and hip hop artist. I ain't new to this, I'm true to this. I've been writing, recording, putting out music for a very long time, decades now. And it feels like, at this point, it feels like breathing. It's a part of who I am, and a lot of who I am as an MC came into being during my experiences in college. So I'm a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Go Tar Heels if there's any in the room. But in my experience, I had a chance to audition for, join, and eventually become leader of a poetry troupe on campus called Ebony Readers Onyx Theater, EROT for short. That organization was my life's blood in my time in college. In those moments where I questioned who I was, where I wrestled with imposter syndrome, or didn't feel like I belonged, EROT, that poetry group, really gave me a sense of life and purpose. It reminded me that even though there's these historical systemic structures that say you don't belong here or this wasn't designed for you, EROT gave me a chance to find my voice and stand in defiance to that and say, no, I actually do belong and I make significant contributions to campus, and here's why. And so cultivating that artistic community was important for me. So it wasn't so much that yes, I did have mentors on campus that were faculty and staff, but we were peer mentors to one another. That artist environment, that artist community fed into me and poured into my spirit in a way that I needed in moments where I felt like my world was sort of caving in. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the roles peers can play in one another's lives. And again, when I say I'm a reflection of the people that have poured into me, that certainly includes my artistic homies as well. So that's a little bit about who I am as a hip hop artist and how I came into the work. I do want to ground my remarks today in a spoken word piece entitled B-Sides. And so I do a lot of call and response spoken word. This is a poem I'm gonna use to kick off. If the spirit moves me, I might add some more as we go today, but vibe with me as we unpack why hip hop might play an important role for students who are seeking to feel validated in educational spaces. So, mic check. I hover precarious over my stereo cassette deck, too vexed to press record, to absorb to turn back. I had an obsession, a progressed infatuation that quickly consumed my heart. It started as a couplet, all rhyme and no reason, but there was freedom in those bars, the instrument of my escape, a liberation of sorts as Nas words paraded from the speakers in grand procession, a cavalcade of parables that pervaded my senses, reminded me of my existence, with each sentence depicting what would happen if I ruled the world. Imagine that. So I graffiti tag it on my memories wall. So when they call it vandalism, I say it's art. I call it poetry, an opus for the beleaguered yet unbroken who still measure time in notes with no half-stepping, only giant steps like Coltrane, like Big Daddy Kane, composed as William Grant Still, steady unmoved by crescendoing hate speech. We made time machines of breakbeats. See, hip-hop be the soundtrack to our history. She waded in the water, followed the drinking gourd, the original remix that made soul food from master scraps, then came back to own her masters. Y'all, she sounds like irony. She sounds like a higher being. To me, every microphone is God's ear pressed against my plate, and he listens. She listens. Sometimes God tells me to pump up the volume since my salvation's been paid in full. And that's word to Rakim. So I rock this mic like I say my prayers, like there's an intimate direct line to the infinite, with instrumental sampling every sentiment, our pain, our diligence, our resilience in the face of adversity, our mercy, grace, frustration, and impatience for justice that's long overdue. As DJ Kool Herc cue the vibe it was made from scratch. Y'all, this wasn't counterculture. This is our culture over a dope beat, and I can't stop, won't stop. When I say hip, y'all say hop, hip, hip. It's a call and response from beyond the bound, from beyond the grave, from beyond the bounds of time and space. After all, I still hear our chains and tambourines. These ghetto gospels jingle like the keys of DJ Khaled. In fact, I see the noosed body in your Harlem shake, desperately gasping for air. I hear the snare drum of Questlove and every crack of a whip and kickback from Darren Wilson's standard issue pistol. Can I live? Can I live? But in this battle, it seems I found immortality. And despite their best efforts, IMC. Y'all don't hear me. IMC. I can be metaphorically cunning, mad creative, a storyteller, the middle class, mainstream castigated, maimed and castrated. Yet in these pages we emerge in mint condition, masterful communicators. Long before we were mere chattel, making connections, metacognitive between the past and future, producing more critical, often mistaken criminals who manifest clarity in every lyric we write. As we undo your mass confusion, we more closely resemble model citizens, speaking our minds consistently, engaging you in meaningful conversation as far as music's concerned. IMC. See, hip hop is a movement. And some days it's the truest thing I've ever known. When I hear a dope verse, I still furrow my brow, and somehow those wrinkles in my forehead form a pathway to my inner peace. So you could always find me somewhere lost between side A and side B. When I say hip, y'all say hop, hip, hip. I'm just assuming you did that wherever you was in the world. I appreciate you for making that noise alongside me and not leaving me hanging today. But I'm really excited, like I said, to sort of set the tone for why hip hop is it's instrumental to who I am, but how it also can be a space where others are invited into a conversation and invited to a place of intimacy to build community and to figure out opportunities for liberation for marginalized populations across the entire world. So don't want to explore hip hop without acknowledging its origins and from the place from whence it came. So getting into some of the specifics, some of the history. Who you see here is Africa Bambaataa, one of the founding DJs of the hip hop movement of the early to mid 1970s. Hip hop had very humble beginnings. It started as a space for Black and Latino youth in the Bronx, New York, to feel some semblance of joy in a world that refused to give them space to exist, right? You think about the 1970s, right? And you see a lot of, you see youth sort of struggling to find ways to exist and experience joy in a world that was rapidly changing. So in the mid-1970s, you have to think about what was going on at the time. The civil rights movement, as we typically know it, with the landmark legislations of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 5, you start to see a change in leadership, young people really stepping up to the plate, but you also see some other systemic factors that are taking over, right? Over policing of low-income neighborhoods, the rampant expanse of unemployment, the infiltration of drugs and guns in some of these communities. You had a staunch opposition to the war in Vietnam and militarization, US militarization across the globe. And for young people in that time, it was hard to find a moment and opportunities to just be, to just exist, to enjoy life together in lockstep with one another. And so hip hop, as it came about in this era, was really about 4 core concrete principles. And I need you to say them with me. It's peace, love, unity, and having fun. So peace, love, unity, fun. Peace, love, unity, fun. And if you ever get lost in today, like, I want you to always come back to that refrain of peace, love, unity, and fun, because that's what hip hop was about and intends to be about. Even today, right? And how can youth express themselves in a way that feels life-giving? And so I wanted to, I'm an MC, a wordsmith, and I want to let you know that I mean what I say. And so when I say peace, I'm coming at peace from the perspective of Dr. King, who writes, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. The idea that we don't say things just to make people feel comfortable or to exercise civility, but peace is a true interrogation of the things that preclude certain groups from feeling fully seen, fully valued, fully affirmed, and fully seen within the eyes of the law, right? So peace is really leaning into your discomfort. Peace is really interrogating systems of inequality and the persistence of oppression for certain groups over long periods of time. Peace isn't avoiding that. Peace is diving into it head first. Love, when I say love, I lean on the words of Auntie Audre Lorde, one of the premier Black queer feminist scholars, who writes, once we recognize what it is we are feeling, once we recognize we can feel deeply, love deeply, can feel joy, then we will demand that all parts of our lives produce that kind of joy, right? So it's not just love as a platitude or feeling love, but it's converting love into something kinetic, an action, something you could feel that then turns to joy, that then turns into some form of production, right? Because when I say hip hop, I don't just mean rappers or MCs. I mean, when I say hip hop culture, I'm referring to DJs, MCs, breakdancers, graffiti artists, the full gamut of the multi-modalities that make up hip hop culture. It's all hip hop and it's all us. And when we talk about love, I lean on Audre Lorde's comments here, who really view love as a verb, not just a noun. So it gives it that sense of motion. And then unity, when we talk about unity, Brother Malcolm X perhaps said it best: we need more light about each other. Light creates understanding, understanding creates love, love creates patience, and patience creates unity, right? And so when we're patient with one another, when we take our time, we are concerned with what's happening to our neighbors, when we realize we are not just individuals who are living lives in a vacuum, but what happens to me invariably affects your life as well, right? When we start to view life as a collective struggle for human rights, then that sense of unity shines through. And hip hop doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Hip hop requires people to be in fluid conversation with one another, in dialogue with one another. And in order to create, you got to be in sync with someone else. And so hip hop is intended, from its origins, is intended to bring folks together across that difference. So that's what I mean when I say peace, love, unity, and the fun is self-explanatory. So hopefully you don't veer too far from that. But if you get lost today, always come back home to peace, love, unity, fun. Now, what I want to talk about now is a framework I use to guide my approach to a study that I'll talk to you about that was aimed at creating a new qualitative methodology called mixtaping. And essentially, the goal of mixtaping is to use a hip hop form of knowledge creation, that is a mixtape, like an album, right? To use a form of hip hop knowledge production as a means of collecting data to assess a certain experience that a certain group is having. And I'll get into all of that, but that's guided by this framework called critical hip hop pedagogy. Critical hip hop pedagogy is sort of grounded in critical race theory. I know that word it has a lot of weight these days, and a lot of people don't know what they're talking about when they talk about CRT. But maybe that's another webinar for another day. But critical race theory is sort of the tradition in which critical hip hop pedagogy was begat. And essentially, it says that centering race, racism, and intersections of other forms of oppression are necessary when doing work with Black and brown youth, and youth who are historically marginalized, be them first-generation college students or are low income or undocumented, right? Centering the oppression that they experience needs to be at the core of the work we do when we set out to serve these populations. Critical hip hop pedagogy is intended to challenge traditional paradigms of teaching and learning. So to go beyond the traditional sort of school curriculum that that sort of regard students as empty vessels that are waiting to be filled, but really celebrating the knowledge that students already possess as a means of where to start your curriculum, where to start your service, and where to start your programming. Centering the experiences of students of color. So again, not regarding students of color as and their ways of knowing as liabilities, but really looking at them as experts in their own lived experiences in their own neighborhoods and communities. Hip hop pedagogy compels us to be committed, my bad, to not advance the slides, but hip hop pedagogy compels us to be committed to social justice more broadly, right? So not just looking inward about how can I achieve academically, or how can I achieve or influence this one student, but how do we collectively rise up together? And then how do we assess what we do? Social justice is an ongoing project. It doesn't just stop when that kid gets into college, or they make the A on that report card, but it requires that we go back, reflect, and do the thing that needs to be done to meet that particular student where they're at every single time. It's exhausting work, but it's necessary. And hip hop pedagogy compels us to do that work. And ultimately, it uses a transdisciplinary approach. So using all the things we know from across all disciplines, science, math, English, history, so like bringing all of these things together and not saying that a particular discipline is off limits or things are out of the question because they make us uncomfortable or we're not used to it. Hip hop pedagogy leans into that discomfort. For sure. And so the research question that guided my study essentially was, what does the creation of a hip hop mixtape by Black male college educated MCs reveal about Black men's experiences in higher education? So really I'm looking at how do people who identify as rappers, particularly Black males in college, use hip hop as a mechanism to navigate their college experience? And moreover, what happens when we compile these experiences into a mixtape that's then consumable to a larger audience? So a lot of times, I don't know how many grad students we got in the room, or people who are recent grad school graduates, or just people who have experienced higher education in general, right? You know, a lot of knowledge that comes out is produced in these journals. These journals sit behind paywalls, and not everybody has access to them. Sometimes journals aren't easily articulated from scholarship into practice, right? So really the idea behind the mixtape is remixing what we regard as data, remixing what we regard as knowledge, and putting the findings from a study directly into consumers' hands as to say, like, hey, this is what's been produced as a result of us trying to understand the experience of this group that might be marginalized in this particular context. So what would happen if we take a traditional way of knowing within hip hop, i.e. the mixtape, and bring that and put that in the hands of the people that actually work with these students that are actively trying to figure out how to improve this group's experiences, and what does it say about their experiences in college more broadly? So really using hip hop as the basis of knowledge production is sort of the point behind this research question. And so a methodology was robust, but pretty straightforward insofar as the study moved through certain parts, and actually it's still ongoing, which I'll be happy to explain. But where we are now, we've completed one-on-one participant interviews. These interviews were intended to understand students' hip-hop origin story. So what brought them to be hip-hop artists? How did they start writing? How did they come to know themselves as MCs? What compelled them to continue creating hip hop when they arrived in college, right? Like, how did they take this way of knowing from where they're from to where they currently are, and how does it shape their perspective on their future? And what does it mean to be Black and male at their university? Like, what does it mean to be you and your body at your institution? These are all things I was hoping to unpack in just my initial conversations that were intended to establish a trust and rapport so that we could get to the more intimate parts of the research experience together, which was at the end of the participant interview, I gave each participant a prompt to record a song to. And the prompt was, describe your experience as a Black male at your institution. They could take that any way they wanted. They could, find whatever beat worked for them. They could create something. They could, the idea here was to challenge them to sort of think broadly about their experience, but not so narrow that they left something out, right? I wanted them to have the freedom to name what was really going on, but also not feel constricted by the narrowness of my question, right? I wanted this to feel like, you know, a song that they would write themselves, like without being prompted to do so, right? I wanted this to feel natural to them, so they could take it any way they wanted, and they definitely ran with it, which was really dope. And we'll get into some of those findings in a second. But after they've done that, I've compiled and arranged the songs into a cohesive mixtape. So I have an order of how the songs will be laid out. The part of the study I haven't got to yet is sharing the mixtape across multiple streaming platforms. That's just for various reasons. This is definitely a project that was conducted throughout COVID times, which are still ongoing. And so being mindful of the pandemic, I know it's been hard to connect with some students. Students are connected, disconnected, feeling some type of way right now because we're demanding a lot of them in each of our colleges and universities. And I understand that. And so I don't want to move forward in the project until I have the consent of everyone on board. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But there's enough data here for us to sort of unpack what this might mean for our work together. And so let's see who these MCs are, who decided to sign up for this exploration. So all these names you see here are pseudonyms. So these are not the real names of the students, but I wanted to protect their identities in their universities. But you can see they represent mostly undergraduates, but there's a few graduate students participating in the study. The diversity within their majors and disciplines was really fantastic to me. I thought that was dope to see that so many students who vibe as, you know, MCs still have so many other like very, you know, academic and professional interests. And it's really cool to see it all come together. All students attended PWIs. I really wish there were some HBCU participants in this study, and we could talk about that, but that's certainly one of the limitations of the project. But all students attended PWIs, and then you could see the song titles listed here. And if I'm not mistaken, Landon's song BMOC, it stands for Black Man on Campus. So just so we're clear, the only student that did not submit a song was Clyde. He is a PhD candidate, so I get it. He got a ton to do. My man is dissertating, so I ain't mad at him at all. But for the 9 folks who participated, we received a song from everybody but one. So that was really exciting. And you see this group Freedom, which is a name, again, a pseudonym for Brian, William, and Malcolm. They are a rap group. I interviewed them together. They submitted a song together under their group pseudonym called Hindsight 2020. So that's who's in the study. We could talk more about that later, but let's get to the meat and potatoes, why we came here to talk today. So the findings indicated that these 9 college-educated Black male MCs experienced these 3 things. So they regard their institutions as the new trap, right? So they talked about how they navigated the trap, and I'll break all of this down, but they regarded their college as the trap itself. And so we'll get into that in a second, but they also defined themselves in relation to a ubiquitous they. So they was sort of a composite character that symbolized all of those things that make up white supremacist power structures, right? So when you think about they, you know, to lean on 1970s vernacular, they would be the man, right? Like they would be the sort of amorphous body that symbolize the discursive forces at play that perpetuate whiteness and white supremacy. So they were each defining themselves in relation to that composite character. And then they also each use their lyricism to pay it forward, to put the team on. A lot of them expressed how important it was that they weren't the last to walk the path, how they didn't want to be the last to walk the path that they are currently on. And so we'll go into some of these lyrics, but you'll see them dispersed throughout. And so let's get into the first finding, this idea that college is the new trap, and how do they navigate it? So for those that are unaware, I don't know how many hip hop heads I have in the audience, but trap music is like a subgenre of hip hop. So popularized by artists like T.I., Young Jeezy in the early aughts, early 2000s. Music features heavy 808 kick drums, melodic synths. Really, trap music focuses particularly on drugs, other illegal business ventures, and lifestyles that sort of are hard to escape, right? Hence the term trap. You think about phrases like the cycle of violence or the cycle of poverty or the cycle of inequality. It's the trap is you being enmeshed in the cycle, you participating in the system because it's either all you've been exposed to or it's perceived as your only way out of your current circumstance. And yet we continue to feed into this trap because we need it to survive. And so it was fascinating that they regarded college as the trap. And you could see how some of this is negotiated throughout their lyrics. I ain't get no sleep, but Jeezy told me trap or die, so I cannot close my eyes, as said by Amir, right? Like this idea that you're learning or taking in this knowledge from the music you've been consuming as a mechanism for understanding how you might navigate an environment that feels unfamiliar to you. I'm serving up the beat, no MSG. The system tried to tie me down. I turned the trap into 2 degrees, right? So it's this idea that I'm using my environment, although my environment might be exploiting me for who I am in my body or my presence on this campus as a marginalized student. Although I might be your poster child for diversity, I'm still getting something out of the experience. And it's these 2 degrees that I came to get, regardless of how you treat me in pursuit of those goals. So, but you see these lyrics here, really poignant, really powerful. They really highlight that the students know what's going on, but in spite of knowing what's going on, they also realize how they can't turn their back on the trap or the institution, because in many ways we purport or describe a college education as a pathway to financial stability, and active and meaningful participation in a capitalist society almost requires or demands that we pursue a college degree in order to have some semblance of financial freedom. So it's hard to escape that reality. And for that reason, you see the artists, the participants in the study, using their voices in a way to acknowledge that reality, but stay true to who they are in some way, shape, or form. I had to get selfish, started out with just me, got me some friends, helped them study, got put on probation, advisors don't help. They all hesitated. Dean's list next year. Now they want my good graces. I was down bad, and they know that. Ain't giving me the tools I need to succeed. Hiding my major needs, right? As Travis so eloquently put it, this idea that, I'm playing the game, I'm doing what I need to do. Sometimes you run into missteps, you make mistakes, you see them negotiating their moments of vulnerability, him being put on academic probation, and then bouncing back, right? It felt like he had to find his own way out, and trap music, right, sort of models that existence. So this is sort of how they made sense of college being an environment that was hard to escape, but they had no choice to participate in, making it a trap. The ubiquitous they. This one was an interesting data point that I was excited to see. And it's a data point that I've fed into myself as an MC, or it showed up in my own music in some ways. But again, the they propagates whiteness, right? I'm trying to feel safe in my own skin, foot in the door, but they won't let me in, right? This idea that you might let me into the institution, I might enroll here, but I still don't feel like I belong. The names on the buildings, the way you teach, my own form of cultural expressiveness might not have a seat at the table or have a prominent presence on campus, right? So yes, I could get in, but what will you do for me when I get here to ensure that I stay, to ensure my success beyond admission, right? Because that's not the end goal. The end goal is to get you to and through. And so really the they is interrogated quite heavily, and rightfully so. I'm in where was I? Lately, I've been on the edge. I don't think you understand right now. They don't want to see me as a man. So I'm going beast mode. I'm at it again. It's this idea that I got to do whatever it takes, even though this environment thinks they know me, or they make assumptions about me and my body and who I am on campus. I gotta go beast mode and do what it takes to not just survive in this space, but find a way to thrive. I think Greg and Jordan do a great job of wrestling with what does it mean to be in your Black body, in your Black skin, with your Black hair in this space, and people, again, making assumptions about why you're here. They assume you're a criminal, assume you don't have a student ID, or assume you don't belong. They assume you're an athlete. They make all of these assumptions and neglect the reality of who it is that you are. And the hook on Jordan's song is actually captured right here in this bottom right corner. The song was entitled Funny How. And he's walking you through what he means when he says it's funny how is sort of it symbolizes irony. And it's funny how they thought I would fail and I wouldn't. It's funny how they wanted me to fold and I couldn't. And he keeps this going, and he follows that thread throughout his piece, and it's really powerful. Landon also offered this sense that, look, I was down bad, couldn't see a way out, asking what I'm finna do. All I heard was they doubt, right? So it's this idea that it's undeniable that you're being stereotyped, right? What do you do with that stereotype? And you sort of see they're not just defining themselves in relation to they, but as the songs go on, as these lyrics continue to manifest, they are also taking a defiant stance to what people believe about them in their skin at their particular institutions. This defiant stance signifies that they are worthy of respect, and you have the right to you are right to fear them in their liberation, because giving them a space to like speak their mind in this way really disrupts mainstream discourse on campus. It disrupts this idea that what you believe about yourself, your power, and your privilege, it unsettles all of those things when you actually have to acknowledge the structures that are in place that made these students feel like they weren't wanted. So that was an important data point. And certainly last but not least, with regard to the findings, these are more ubiquitous days, my bad. This is sort of where you see the transition into a more defiant stance, where students are talking about, okay, this is how I'm being defined by others. This is how I define myself, and this is how you're going to get in line and appreciate what I got to say. Freedom, they do a great job of referring to themselves as GOATs, that is greatest of all time, kings, legends, these like powerful words that signify power, strength, perseverance, right? The idea of being legends on campus, leaving a legacy behind, something that people will remember them for, beyond just being in Black and brown bodies on their particular campus. I love Greg's point where he says, I'm a mix between a gangster and a businessman, so you never know what state I'm in. Like that's hard. That's a bar, bro. Like the idea that I own my presence so much so that you don't know who I'm going to be, and that frightens you, and I like it. Like I really appreciate his ability to double down on that and say, this is how I'm going to reclaim my sense of self on this particular campus. So you start to see this more defiant, braggadocious turn. Even though they have these assumptions about them, they can't stop me from being the self that I hope to become in my life at this university and beyond. I just got a happy finger today. I'm just going too fast. All right. Last but not least, paying it forward. This was a beautiful takeaway. The idea that the knowledge that I've acquired can't just stop with me. Amir opens with, oh, no. Who was it? Sorry. Travis opened with this line in his song. Pops said, use that brain up in your head before you lose it. Now I just got so much to prove and I ain't losing, right? It signifies that knowledge is ancestral, it's passed down. His dad instilled this love of education within him. And in his current pursuit of education, he also realizes I can't be the last, right? And so Amir, responds on his own record. He says, I came to school to die with a check, not debt. And I'm going to put the little homies on up next, right? And that's really where the title of this piece came from, right? Like that bar was particularly important because, it leads one to believe that, the student has some knowledge, some semblance of understanding of the system of financial aid that keeps a lot of students in debt, perhaps, throughout their lifespan, right? But that debt is worth the risk to him because he showed up, he's there, and he's going to find a way to pay it back. But he also knows that his presence there is only going to be, for him, his presence is measured in his ability to carve out a space for someone else. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a really beautiful thing. You could see some of the other lyrics here. I remember every step forward, got to reach your hand back. Shouldn't even have to wait for you to be shouldn't have to wait to be an old head to understand that. Brian from Freedom, this really speaks to the model of Sankofa, right? Reaching back as you move forward, just understanding that to create moments of generational opportunity that extend beyond this present moment, it's important that we uplift one another as we climb. And so paying it forward was a beautiful, beautiful data point that I'm really excited. I was really excited to hear them contend with. And so that leads me to implications for mentoring and mentoring programs, right? Like, yes, I did this mixtape. It was a lot of fun. Yes, they had bars. Yes, it was super dope. Yes, it was like inviting and like challenging to wrestle with and fun to unpack. But what does it mean for us as educators, as mentors, researchers, that sort of thing? And it challenges us to reimagine how success is measured. So asking ourselves, and I've got some information on this on the next slide, but asking ourselves, like, what data are we looking for? Like, what actually signifies success? What signifies that what we do actually works? And how do we invite students into that conversation to explain to us, right? We can make assumptions that this data point is important for some reason, but if we don't have the people involved that we're actually serving, like, what good does that data do if we don't get at the stories that matter to them? And for that reason, numbers alone aren't sufficient, right? So I think this comes from my stance as a interpretive inquirer, an arts-based qualitative methodologist, right? Like, this speaks to sort of my stance, but understanding the stories beyond the numbers are instrumental in developing narratives when you are making appeals to funders, right? Understanding student stories is just valuable for you to understand the impact of the work you're having and where you potentially need to go as an organization, right? Because the students we serve that were 12th graders in 2015 are very different than the 12th graders that we serve in 2021, right? They have very different needs, very different life circumstances. Everybody's been shaped by the pandemic in some way, right? So in what ways do the numbers not reflect the reality of what's going on the ground? And so I think in a moment like this, we really need to be pushing for authentic counter-narrative storytelling that really unearths what's going on with our students beyond their grades, their transcripts, their enrollment habits, that sort of thing. Also regarding students as knowledge bearers, right? Like, the fact that there are a million ways I could have, tried to assess the Black male experience in colleges and universities, but I chose hip hop artists and I chose students who identify as that because that's not a group that we particularly lean on as experts in anything, right? And so how can you make students feel like experts in their own lived experience when you set out to do your work? I think if you invite them to the table, you'll be surprised by what you learn from their experience and their experience, not just in schools, but their experience with your organization, right? What can you learn about your organization through the eyes of them, and regarding them as knowledge bearers in that conversation is incredibly important. So maybe you won't have rappers that you serve, right? Maybe not every student, hip hop might not be the way they see the world, but they have a worldview and they have a way of knowing and existing. And until we tap into that, our data points, our ability to coordinate outreach and develop curriculum will always fall below, will always miss the bar. And so it's really important to regard them as experts in their lived experience. Inviting students to create and analyze data with you is really, really fun. Now, it wasn't done as much so on this project, but in my dissertation research, I created opportunities for the participants in my study to make meaning of the data with me in community together. It goes back to what I was saying about hip hop not happening in a vacuum. Like, if I'm the only person, if I'm the researcher, right, I have all the power in this scenario. And if I'm the only person making sense of the data, then, in what ways might I be misrepresenting what my participants are saying? In what ways am I missing the mark? There might be subtleties that I don't get because I'm a little older than them, and a slang word they use may have a different connotation than the type of slang I use, right? So it's just a very important, when you think about data collecting and analyzing, in what ways are you asking your subjects to participate, to speak back to you, to ensure that you are on the right track? And it's a great way to get them involved. Happy to share more about my dissertation project and the coding cipher I did to break all of my data down, but that's a webinar for another day. And seeing students' identities as assets rather than liabilities is of the utmost importance, right? This isn't necessarily tied to data collection, but it is tied to how we see the students we serve. They are not broken. They are not needing to be fixed, right? They are fully human right now, and they have things that make them special. And they don't often know that their hip hop lens or their ability to dance or their sense of humor, right? They don't often see that their orientation to the world is important and valuable and incredibly necessary for them to navigate a world that is wasn't designed for them to thrive or to feel love or to feel fully human or to make mistakes and learn from them, right? So how can we continue to take asset-based approaches to the work that we do, all right? And so to my first point on this slide, reimagining how success is measured. This is just how I measure success in my course. So I teach an education course for a divisional course for students who are trying to determine their major, but might be interested in education. It's called Hip Hop Pedagogy, Poetics, and Remixes for Higher Ed. It's all about using hip hop as a lens to reimagine opportunities for diversity, equity, inclusion in colleges and universities. And essentially every assignment I sort of like look at through this lens, these 5 C's, creativity, curiosity, connectivity, collaboration, and consciousness. How are students leaning into their creative voices? How are they, how is their curiosity showing, right? Are they asking questions of themselves, of society, of the world, of us as educators, right? What ways are they asking critical questions? I reward asking tough questions and making me pause and think. And I think that is of utmost importance, because a lot of times students in schools get shut down when they ask too many questions. So that's really important. Connectivity. So how are they connecting things in their lived experience to what's happening in the classroom? So the curriculum doesn't just become this antiquated thing that lives in a textbook, but something that they actually carry out on a day-to-day basis. How are they collaborating with one another? Am I creating moments for them to feel compelled to work together, to see their success is tied to their peers, right? So not just rewarding my students with the A's or whatever, right? But finding opportunities to make for students to help pull one another along in ways that make sense, in ways that feel comfortable and natural. And how does that show up in their work? And then consciousness, right? So how do all these things work together to promote a deeper sense of a knowledge of self and a knowledge of the world around them? How are they conscious of the decisions they make and the consequences they have, and the impact we have when we all come together under one accord? So those are sort of my findings and big takeaways. Happy to explore some more, leave some time for questions, but thank you all for your time today. Again, my name is Donovan Livingston. Hit me up, Instagram, Twitter. I do follow back. And if you got questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me via email. Now, I know you might be hungry and you see this little delicious looking biscuit over to the side. This is actually the title of my album I released in the summer of 2020 called Molasses. Essentially, it's a metaphor for being Black in the South. You know, you think about molasses, it's thick, it's heavy, it's sticky, right? It's everything our history is in this country, but at the end of the day, it's still sweet to be who we are. So if you're interested in hip hop, if you're just curious about what your boy rap like on the beat, you know what I'm saying? Go check that thing out. It's across all streaming platforms. But thank you all for your time and attention this afternoon. I'm going to stop my screen share so I can see everybody.
Thank you so much.
See everybody, see many, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Donovan. You got some great some great chats in there, definitely praising all the work that you're doing. I know, Donovan has a class soon, but we do have a couple minutes for Q&A, so definitely feel free to throw in some questions if you have any while Donovan's still here. We do have one question currently from John that says, this seems like a powerful way of gathering genuine qualitative data. How long did it take the students to generate it? How much support did they need with the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it actually did not take them long. Well, when I say it didn't take them long, I started this process in July of 2020. The project went from July until about January of 2021. That's when I got my last song in. So really like this, oh man, I'm terrible with math, 5-6 month window of interviews, prompts, checking in, right? Because we were all in different places. And I didn't know students' access to technology or access to a studio. I didn't know what that was like. So it took about 6 months, which actually exceeded my expectations, but it takes time. And that's a limitation, but also a blessing. It signifies that you care enough about the questions you're asking and the communities you're asking these questions of, if you're willing to take that time. So it is time consuming from the coding, the arranging of the songs and that sort of thing, but it brings life to your work in ways that you might not be ready for. So that was exciting.
Sure, thanks so much.
Yeah,
we got more questions coming in. Okay, so where could we listen to the final blend of all songs? Super interested to listen.
Yeah, so I have to confer with all of the participants first to get their consent to release it. And so I don't know how long that'll take. Some folks, some of those students graduated, so they might have different email addresses, but I am pretty much in touch with a lot of them. This was harder to get in touch with them because it was at the start of their first year of virtual learning. So they had a lot going on, a lot of transitions. But hopefully I'd like to release this early in 2022, maybe Black History Month. Is a goal. But yeah, please just check back in with me and it'll be across all my social media accounts when it is ready. So follow me and I got you.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was another question in terms of following the progress of the mixtape. So make sure to follow Donovan or feel free to reach out.
And y'all are the first people aside from them and myself to actually like see some of the lyrics. So this is all like a debut of sorts. This is my first time doing this. And so I'm glad they've gotten such warm reception. They'll be so happy to hear that their lyrics have moved educators and scholars in this way. So fantastic. Thank you.
For sure. Are there any songwriting resources you would recommend for middle school age students or even high school? Resources around that.
Yeah. So on my Canvas, on my like a course portal, I have a module called Hip Hop Resources. Essentially, there's a few YouTube videos about how to count bars and write to beats, right? How to structure a rhyme scheme. Now they may seem really complex, so I would encourage you as the adult to like watch them first. And I'm happy to share those resources with you. It'll take some copy and pasting, but I'll see if I can grab it in a second. But I would say for the younger students, make sure you go through it first so you sort of can break it down in areas where it might seem too complex. But I think of the resources that I've compiled, high school students can certainly wrestle with it. I use it as a teaching tool in my classes as well. Genius.com is always a great resource, especially if you're breaking down lyrics with your students, right? To unpack what certain words mean and what metaphors mean. So Genius is always a great place to start. But when it comes to writing, there's a few YouTube videos that I found that were really good.
Great, thanks so much. Can you talk a little bit more about wanting participants from HBCUs?
Yeah, so I put out a big sort of call on my Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I reached out to colleagues that I had at different universities, colleagues specifically that I knew worked with student artists. And so these are just who I got responses from. And I was kind of working on a specific timeline so I could publish this in a certain window. So it was in part time constraint, but also had I given myself more time, maybe started a few weeks or a month earlier, I would have been able to track down at least one. Now, I did have an interest from a student that attended an HBCU, but he did not respond to my follow-up emails. So, you know, there's students who self-select out of the process for whatever reason at different times. And, you know, I don't hold it against anyone. It's a time-consuming effort, right? And so I knew that would be the case. But if I do this again, when I do this again, it might make sense to just do a project specifically aimed at students at HBCUs. So since I got all PWIs this time around, maybe there's something new there. So thank you.
Yeah. So I know you talked a little bit about songwriting resources. Somebody is interested in terms of where can we get plugged into more participatory research practices like this? I'd love to learn more about like how to implement a project like this to allow for more mediums of expression.
Yeah, there's a resource. Oh my gosh. It's a methodology called youth participatory action research. There's like actually an institute that does it's called YPAR really well. I want to say it's based at Cal Berkeley, but if you look up youth participatory action research, it should be their institute should be among the first things that come up. So I would encourage you to look at what some schools and professors are doing. Yes, YPAR Hub Berkeley. Thank you, Noah. My man, appreciate you, fam. That's the homies right there. That's how none of this happens in a vacuum, y'all. So yeah, that YPAR Hub is a great place to start to help you think about how you might get your youth involved in not just assessing your organization, but assessing social justice needs in your community as well.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. And yeah, if anyone in the audience also has any other resources they want to share for folks around resources, ways that they can engage art and like mediums of expression like this. I did have one question about, was it intentional only to include males? And yeah, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, because it was intentional to only include males because it was for a special edition of a journal that's coming out that specifically looks at Black male experiences in colleges and universities. So a part of one of my limitations on my dissertation when I had an on-call for a similar project. I was really hoping to get some women or queer artists involved in it. Hip hop has historically not been a space where queer folks or women can feel fully seen and validated in some ways. And I really want to push against that as a hip hop scholar. And so if you know of women who rap, who are in college, who I approach this work as an educator, but I definitely want to be in a space where I can help sort of challenge those traditional paradigms within hip hop that replicate systems of white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, that sort of thing. So I think if hip hop is really going to be an inclusive space, the future of hip hop pedagogy research needs to incorporate more queer and hip hop feminist voices, for sure.
For sure. Awesome. So I know we have about 3 minutes until you have to run. So I'm going to wrap it up soon. I know we had some more questions we weren't able to get to, but again, feel free to reach out to Donovan. Donovan, can you post your social media or just let us know what it is as I kind of pull up our closing slides today. But thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you, family. This was life-giving. So I appreciate y'all. IG, Twitter. Oh yeah, Facebook. Sorry. I think out loud when I type.
Okay, great. And so while I close out, I just want to share a few more additional resources. Again, thank you all for joining us today, asking your questions, engaging with us. Thank you, Donovan, so much for all the work that you're doing and sharing your research with us. And again, feel free to connect with Mentor through these additional channels. Our affiliates across the country serve as clearinghouse for training, resources, public awareness, and advocacy. Again, I want to thank you, Atreus and Charmaine from Mentor North Carolina, who weren't able to be with us today, but they really were pivotal in forming this connection and are doing great work in North Carolina. So feel free to check out who your affiliate is located in your region. The Mentoring Connector is another resource for programs. You can submit your program to the Mentoring Connector to help recruit volunteers and mentors for folks who might be looking. And the National Mentoring Resource Center, funded by OJJDP, has a tons of evidence-based resources, and you can apply for no-cost training and technical assistance. Again, I know our affiliates across the country also are pivotal in providing that technical assistance. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. Lastly, please help us out by answering the survey questions at the end of the webinar. We really take a look at those surveys to help inform what topics we will be showcasing in the next year. So as we think about 2020, definitely help provide your feedback. We will also be sending out a follow-up email with information about the recording and the resources. I do want to note that Donovan won't be sharing his slides for this webinar just because the research is still in progress, but we will have this recording available, and I will share out his contact information if you would want to reach out. And again, you can stay connected with us by emailing us. You can also visit the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage to access this webinar and previous webinars. Again, thank you, Donovan. Thank you all for being here. And next month we have another webinar on the topic of mental health, which will be really exciting and important on Thursday, December 16th at 1 p.m. Again, thank you all. I hope you all have a great